So let's dive into how the structure plays a role into all of that. I was wondering, how does, if it's a thermoplastic versus a thermoset or pendant groups cross-linking, how does all of that play a role into the applications these polymers are selected for?
I think it depends on what you want to do and
Right.
your processing of it. So I've been in the healthcare area for a while. I just moved over to the composites GBU. So I switched into a new area. So in composites, thermosets are a very big thing. Epoxies, they react and they have the carbon fibers in there to make these. But they're also moving towards thermoplastic types composites because it gives you a different type of processing, a different way of doing things. And so maybe you can make things cheaper, you can make a different form of it. So it really comes into, you need a strong engineer, someone with some experience to guide you down the path of, what are you really trying to do? And then what gives you the properties you need, what gives you the lowest cost, total cost of ownership to do that, and also gives you the properties that you're ultimately looking for. So a lot of times different material classes just fit right for different applications. Like when I was in the healthcare area, we had 7 families of materials. Solvay has approximately 35, especially polymers, has 35 to 40 different families of materials. And then of those families, there's probably about, 1,500 different products. So of those 35 to 40 families, 7 of them made sense for healthcare because they had the right material properties that you needed from, whether it's temperature, chemical resistance, can be sterilized. And then even some of the more interesting ones, we have ones that we talked about the knee. Currently, we don't have material that are in the permanent knee. We're looking at that for the future. But we do have materials that go into spinal cages. So if you have an issue with your spine, some of the vertebrae need to be replaced. You can do titanium, but there's issues with titanium. First of all, if you take an x-ray of it, x-rays bounce off of it, lights up. And so it's very hard for the doctor to see what's really going on. Was it put in right? Is there problems around that area? You can't really tell. So we have a material PEEK that matches the properties of bone. And this is important because if you have titanium, it's super strong. Stronger is better, right? You'd think that, but the problem is it stress yields. So your body goes, oh, wow, this is taking care of all the loads. So all the bones around that start to not do their job. And over a decade, you're going to lose bone density. And then all those other bones are going to start to crack. Mm-hmm. So 20 years ago, I had a screw in my ankle when I broke my ankle. And, a year later, the doctor's like, well, we need to take the screw out. And I'm like, you mean I got to do rehab again? And he's like, yeah, but this is best long term. I didn't understand it back then. Now I do. I didn't like going through rehab a second time, but, it was necessary to, keep a strong ankle.
And just a quick clarification there. When you say 40 classes of materials, are you talking about, different polymer subdivisions, but you're talking about, one class might be a PEEK class of materials that you have all these applications for, then the next one might be some advanced conductive polymer that you have all these applications for and going down the line that way, or how does that disseminate down to the products?
So different, when I say families, it's more or less different chemical structures, so you'd have, the tectophlon, so you'd have those, those fluoroelastomers would be, one family, and then you might have a perfluoroelastomer would be another family. And then you'd have PFA would be, fluoropolymer would be another family. And then under that, you'd have a bunch of products, and they're going to modify those slightly. So really an actual different type of polymer would be this family. So we have about 40 different families, so different types of polymers, and then you modify those slightly under there to get, different properties that people might need for a certain application.
And so, we've kind of touched on implants a little bit more, but more explicitly, can you give us a few examples of how Solvay's different polymers are utilized in the biomedical field, in particular in the following 3 areas being, hemodialysis, packaging for pills, and for medical implants in particular?
So I've touched on the pills a little bit, and I touched on the implants. So, why don't we go to the hemodialysis? Why is hemodialysis needed? So if someone's kidneys are start to fail, then they got to go and they got to get hooked up to a hemodialysis machine, and then basically does the work of your kidney. And the materials that we have, what's nice about them is that they can make them into a porous type structure that has the right pore size that basically pulls out the bad stuff out of your blood. It's actually the filter media that is made out of the plastic. And so the person goes in, they go in for the hemodialysis, and then it filters all that out. You get rid of the filter media, and then you come back 2 days later and have another treatment with it. So over 25 years, we're a world leader in this area. Approximately 2 million people a year, are treated, maybe a little less, treated with these types of materials, Solvay type materials each year, which is really impressive. It really helps save, a lot of people's lives when they have a, critical problem like this. And we continue to do innovation, we're trying to improve the patient experience. The people, you have to have blood thinners when you get hemodialysis, so trying to thin the blood. Are there ways to, maybe modify the polymers so, you don't have to have as much blood thinner you put in there so that you just you feel better when you come out of it, you get a better patient experience. So that's constantly being looked at. How do you get better patient outcomes, better patient feel?
So I'm curious, in the hemodialysis side of it, so the polymers inside the filter. And so my question is, in what ways does further innovation in that, filter material design, how does that further improve, the patient experience?
So, I think that, working very closely with different companies that are making these devices, I think they really understand, what's being filtered out. We talked about the blood thinner. The blood thinner is one aspect of it. So if you can reduce the amount of clotting that that are on the membranes as you're doing that, then you don't have to put as much blood thinner in, which my understanding does not make the patient feel very good. So if you can modify your polymer structure so that you can improve that, then that's one way of doing it. And working with the leaders in the industry, there's a lot of science behind this, medical science. So you got to match it with, okay, they understand what's being filtered out, what's good, what's bad, and then how do you modify the polymer? And then there's a give and take, always in these types of industries, depending on what you want to do. If you want a certain pore size, how's the processing? How expensive is it going to be? Sometimes you can do some pretty fancy things, but then you can't produce it, or you can't produce it in the quantities that you need. And so then all of a sudden the cost goes, and then becomes cost prohibitive. So there's always these give and takes that you struggle with. There's no perfect world. And that's sort of the fun part of it. If it was easy, everybody would do it. So you got to have that balance.
But you're saying that you can really engineer the structure of this polymer filter to really hone in on the filtering properties, and you can really engineer that tightly.
Yeah, and then that's the hardcore R&D folks. That's what they're doing, and then they try to translate and understand what the OEM, the person making this filter, wants, or what they think they want, and having that dialogue back and forth.
Can you give us a little bit more insight into what factors specifically are the most sought after? Is it porosity, or is it another property in the healthcare area?
I think I'll give you a list. Sterilization's obviously extremely important.
Sure.
That's why a lot of these materials are used. Then you have the disinfectant, so aggressive chemicals. Then the biocompatibility. So there's something that the FDA has. They're called master access files. And I think I was talking to one of you ahead of time. If you actually went and printed this master access file out, it would be like this. It would be like, it's super, super fast. Tons and tons of data in there. So, and there's a lot of testing that needs to be done. There's a standard out there, ISO 10993, and there's, I think, 21 or 22 different parts to that standard. And so if you're going to go for an implant, a permanent implant, which means 30 days or more, you're going to have a lot more of that portfolio that needs to be done and put together. And so all of our materials that go into implants, we have that data, we feel comfortable with that. Now, the end user still has to design it and determine if it's fit for use in an application. But by us having all that information, they know, oh, this material actually works, it has the properties we need, so it lowers the risk for going forward with those, and it helps speed the regulatory process. Now, if you go to something that only needs 24 hours of body fluid contact, which is some of our medical grade polymer, which are, the other part of our portfolio, then you don't need as much testing, for that type of application, because, the risk level is a little bit less, because you're going to be in a permanent implant. So we have that data, and that's very important as you go into these types of applications, because your body does react to different materials in, different strange ways. And so, so that's why there's been a lot of regulation, and why there's a lot of testing out there to make sure that it's, things are safe.